Solidarity comrades, it's me, Connor. I know it's been a while since I have last posted a video. I've been busy and going through a move. But today we are going to be talking about the Rosenberg Case, specifically a writing called A Promise for Tomorrow, Deconstructing the Rosenberg Case by Arlene Tyner, written October 6, 1998. And here it is. I think it's backwards in the video, but there's the illustration. And you can actually find this and print it off yourself on the Party of Communists USA.org in our area of content. But this is a promise for tomorrow, deconstructing the Rosenberg case. 1. What America to me? What is America to me? A name, a map, the flag I see, a certain word, democracy. What is America to me? When I heard the feel-good lyrics of The House I Live In on the radio for the third time, July 4th, my thoughts turned to Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. It wasn't just the power of Frank Sinatra's 1945 Academy Award-winning film version, revived this year as a part of his musical epitaph. What moved me was the direct connection between this sentimental patriotic song and the young Jewish couple hastily put to death nearly half a century ago. Its addition to celebrations of Independence Day is a welcome sign that the blinding fog of virulent political prejudice that sealed the Rosenberg's fate is at last evaporating into history. The House I Live In articulates messages of love for our country's multicultural melting pot. It salutes the common people in everyday life. It stirs pride in our Constitution and First Amendment, freedom of speech, but few Americans know that its author, Lewis Allen, was an American communist during the era when the political radicals were maligned as disloyal and even treasonous. Allen's connection with the Rosenberg family is even lesser known. Lewis Allen was the pen name used by Abel Mariupol, the adoptive father of Michael and Robert Rosenberg, whose parents were so vengefully and needlessly executed as atom spies by the federal government on June 19, 1953. Post-Cold War U.S. and ex-Soviet intelligence stories notwithstanding, the controversy over the Rosenberg's guilt or innocence is still unresolved. This case haunts the conscience of the nation and still touches the raw nerves of those with long memories of the 1950s Red Scare. Almost every aspect of the Rosenberg's arrest, indictment, trial, and execution for espionage is contested. Taken together, the findings of many 1950s historians, legal scholars, and writers mark this complex case of the most profoundly misunderstood, still unresolved miscarriage of justice in American Cold War history. This year marked the 50th anniversary, 1998, of the Hollywood Blacklist. National newspaper publicity and several commemorations have at last made heroes out of latter-day heretics who stood up for freedom of speech and association at the expense of their livelihoods. But no such recognition has been extended to the young wife and husband who resisted compromising their integrity at the expense of their lives. Caught in an FBI witch hunt that many believe could have ensnared any U.S. leftist, communist or not, the Rosenbergs resisted government and media demands for full and complete cooperation in exchange for their lives. This cooperation mandated naming the names over alleged conspirators in what was popularly dubbed the Red Spy Ring. Instead, they charged frame up. In their prison correspondence, the Rosenbergs wrote that the government was using them as scapegoats to justify anti-communist hysteria. They wrote the government was torturing them with offers of continued life in exchange for admitting they had masterminded the theft of the secret of the atom bomb. The secret was characterized by one prosecutor as the most scientific secret ever known to mankind. The headline, Rosenbergs Denounce, Confess, or Die threat, from a January 28, 1953 Daily Worker front page expresses the doomed couple's response to their predicament. 6 months later, famous African-American historian W.E.B. Du Bois eulogized at the Rosenberg's graveside. These people were killed because they would not lie. 2. The house I live in, a plot of earth, a street, the grocer and the butcher, and the people that I meet. Children in the playground, all the faces that I see, all races, all religion. That's for America to me. Most of Europe's intellectuals, writers, religious leaders, politicians, and artists of the 1950s actively opposed the execution of the Rosenbergs. They remember painfully that too many were silent in the face of the Nazi genocide machine that nearly wiped out European Jewry. After the worldwide Rosenberg clemency movement failed to convince President Eisenhower to spare their lives, Abel Myriopol and his wife Anne stepped forward to adopt their 2 orphan sons. 20 years later, Michael and Robert Myriopol, whose names were legally changed, relinquished their anonymity to invigorate the decades-old movement struggle to reopen their parents' case. Following Myriopol's 1975 hard-fought suit against the federal government under the Freedom of Information Act, hundreds of thousands of FBI, CIA files were declassified and released over 20-plus years. These documents, housed in Columbia University's Law Library in New York City, provide important clues to the substance that many claims that the Rosenberg trial was a sham and they were not Master Adam spies. For example, 1. The main witness against the Rosenbergs, Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, his wife, Ruth, and Harry Gold, gave perjured testimony. The FBI and the prosecutors knew these testimonies to be false and encouraged them anyway. 2. The phrase, "I come from Julius," cited by Gold and the Greenglasses as a recognition signal allegedly used as a transfer of atomic secrets in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was concocted in the weeks preceding the Rosenberg's trial. Let me get this out of the way. Oh. I have to mess up in every video. It happened at 7.5 minutes in this time. Every video. And I'm not going to edit this because I'm a fool. 3. Trial Judge Irving R. Kaufman was on the side of the prosecution. He collaborated with the FBI, Justice Department, prosecutors before, during, and after the trial and executions. So we do this on the fly. I'm not going to fix what I did. But of course I'm going to think about it. 4. Judge Kaufman decided on the death sentences before the jury issued its verdict to convict the Rosenbergs on March 29, 1951. 5. Supreme Court Justice Fred Vinson met secretly with Attorney General Herbert Brownwell before Justice William O. Douglas issued the June 17, 1953 stay of execution on new legal grounds. These officials covertly agreed to recall the Supreme Court from summer recess to overturn the anticipated Douglas stay. The doomed couple were then rushed to the electric chair 2 days later. All these claims are documented in scores of books and articles written since 1953. However, except for periods of activism such as the 1970s when the Myriopol's led a movement to reopen the parents' case, the popular press has generally ignored scholarly accounts that criticize the government's treatment of the Rosenbergs. Thus, generations have grown up knowing little about the real substance of a controversy shrouded in myth and mystery for nearly half a century. The official FBI story claims the Rosenbergs transmitted the secret of the atom bomb to the Russians during 1944 and 1945, before this awesome weapon's existence became publicly known after the U.S. bombings of Japan. The country was then allied with the Soviet Union in a life-and-death struggle to defeat Hitler and the other fascist powers. But in studying the Rosenbergs' indictment, which surprisingly says nothing about atomic secrets, the unbelievable oral testimonies of the Greenglasses and the declassified FBI CIA files, one learns that this prosecution was conceived and orchestrated to fit a conspiracy theory that covers up a lack of real evidence. The Rosenbergs committed the crime for which they were ostensibly executed. 3. The place I work, the worker at my side, the little town or city where my people lived and died, the howdy and the handshake, the air of feeling free, the right to speak my mind out. That's America to me. As secrets and lies of the Cold War era have become public in the 1990s, especially the unsolved assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and possibly Robert F. Kennedy. The phrase conspiracy theory has been coined to discredit believers in government wrongdoing, but Ethel and Julius Rosenbergs were victims of real conspiracy theory, cooked up in the paranoid congressional witch hunters such as the House of Un-American Activities Committee and the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. This theory was based on the belief the existence of a militarily aggressive international communist conspiracy that was about to destroy our democratic way of life. The morbid fears fueling the conspiracy belief, a new variation of classic right-wing mythology found throughout American history, escalated into hysterics once the U.S. lost its monopoly on the bomb. The horrors that befell the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the U.S. military dropped atom bombs on them in the closing days of World War II terrified the world. By this time, ordinary Americans were exhausted by decades of struggle to overcome, first, the Great Depression, and soon thereafter, the fascist threat to world peace and freedom. Our people, thus susceptible to demagogic schemes of post-war officials who manipulated real fears of communism and nuclear war. Today, many historians believe post-war threat of Soviet aggression in Europe was exaggerated by U.S. political leaders, policymakers, and their intelligence analysis overlooked the weakened condition of the USSR, one-third of whose industrial capacity had been destroyed by Hitler's occupation just a few years before. Republican Party candidates such as Richard Nixon cynically used anti-communist and anti-Soviet rhetoric against New Deal Democrats purely to win elections. In the early days of the Cold War, the press dutifully and uncritically printed rumors, gossip, and slander about spying and possible leftist connection of New Deal Democrats such as Alger Hiss. Screaming banner headlines about treason and government were commonplace from 1948 to 1952. Thus, the Soviet Union tested its own atom bomb in September 1949. Cries of traitor and red atom bomb spies became more shrill and gained credibility long before the Rosenberg's arrest in the summer of 1950. From September 1949 to early 1950, the FBI was under heavy pressure to apprehend the red spies. Then, in February, Great Britain announced that Klaus Fuchs, a British nuclear physicist who had previously worked on the atom bomb at Los Alamos Manhattan Project, had voluntarily confessed to having transmitted atomic secrets to the USSR. Fuchs said that he had met with an American spy courier, but supplied no name, only a general physical description that could fit thousands of men. A 3-month FBI manhunt began for Fuchs' American connection to Soviet intelligence agents. By May 1950, the FBI zeroed in on Harry Gold, a nondescript Philadelphia chemist, essentially non-political. He had known and done business with Communist Party members in the 1930s and 1940s, but never joined the organization. Yet, in keeping with the Red Atom Spies conspiracy theory, the press truthfully identified Gold as communist. Gold had been questioned inside his home at the FBI headquarters for 2 weeks, while still photos of motion pictures were flown from England and shown to Fuchs. In Hoover's ego-gratifying public relations tale of the FBI getting its man, Fuchs led the FBI to Harry Gold's doorstep, but subsequent researchers have documented that Fuchs had still not identified Gold by the time he confessed to being the scientist spy courier. The truth is that Gold was already known to the FBI, having appeared before the New York grand jury in 1947, investigating whether Communist Party activities could be tied to spying for the Soviet Union. After Gold, the next arrest in the FBI's Atom spy conspiracy did not occur until June 15, 1950, when David Greenglass, Ethel Rosenberg's younger brother, signed a confession. The Greenglass statement said he had stolen atomic information from the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where he had worked during the war as an army machinist. His confession, including Albuquerque, New Mexico, with the courier identified as Harry Gold, whom he said he handed over the classified information at the request of Julius Rosenberg. J. Edgar Hoover also lied to the country about how David Greenglass was apprehended in the official story. Gold picked out Greenglass from hundreds of photos provided by the FBI, but in truth, Greenglass was already known to the FBI. Having been visited by them in February 1950, confronted about this theft of uranium from Los Alamos, Greenglass's wrongdoing made him ripe for the FBI pressure to play a crucial role of linking his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, a communist already known to the FBI, to the secret place where the atomic bomb was constructed. His statement said that Julius Rosenberg had persuaded him through the intermediary of his wife Ruth to steal the data from Los Alamos. Without Greenglass's testimony, the government had virtually no case against the Rosenbergs. It is now generally acknowledged that the government offered the Greenglasses leniency in return for naming Julius Rosenberg as the leader of the atomic spy ring. Although both Greenglasses admitted to actions for which they could not receive the death penalty, David was only sentenced to prison, and Ruth was never even charged. Thus, she was free to remain at home with their two small children. In July, Julius was arrested as a result of the Greenglasses deal. Neither Greenglass said Ethel was a spy, but FBI documents every time. FBI documents reveal she was arrested in August after the Justice Department decided to use her as a lever to force Julius to confess. The Greenglass testimony implicating Ethel as a spy was not developed until the week before the trial. No other evidence was presented against Ethel Rosenberg. The Rosenbergs were convicted solely on uncorroborated oral testimony of co-conspirators. No physical evidence of espionage was admitted into the court. The standards of proof for conspiracy in federal courts was far more lax than in New York state courts, which require corroboration of overt acts to secure conviction. Thus, the jury's verdict was based upon the belief that Gold and the Greenglasses were truthful, but the FBI files released in the 1970s document that officials knew through the jury was never told that Gold was a neurotic habitual liar, and the Greenglasses' testimony at trial was very different from what they told the FBI immediately after David's arrest. FBI memos written by agents conducting interrogations of Harry Gold and David and Ruth Greenglass, as well as the correspondence between these self-confessed spies, their lawyers show a suspicious trail of altered testimony during a 10-month period between Gold's arrest and the March 1951 Rosenberg trial. These principal witnesses went over their stories with FBI officials and federal prosecutors under the pressure of hysterical newspaper stories hammering home the death penalty as the certain fate of Red Atom spies. Part 4. The house I live in, my neighbors white and black, the people who just came here, or from generations back, the town hall and soapbox, the torch of liberty, the home for all God's children. That's America to me. Crucial to understanding the public reaction to the Rosenberg case is the fact that the Atom spy hunt closely followed the 1949 federal conviction of Communist Party leaders for conspiracy to teach and advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government by force and violence. Newspapers were full of story and columns about dangerous communist traitors. And this hysteria that followed the Rosenbergs' arrest in July-August 1950, Congress easily passed the McCarran Act, a bill that mandated registration as foreign agents of all individuals and organizations deemed by the attorney generals to be subversive. The most restrictive parts of the act were later declared unconstitutional, but to this day there still provides a rounding up of subversiveness and placing them in concentration camps. The Rosenberg case played out within the narrow historical view of the Korean War of 1950 to 1953. Our country's soldiers were dying, going missing, and suffering horrible wounds that was billed as a war against communism. The ravings of Senator Joseph McCarthy about communist subversion of government were front-page news every day. Prosecutors and news media focused on the Rosenberg's left-wing beliefs, associations as motivation for their alleged crime. The public and particular jurors hearing the case in 1951 could easily confuse repetitive rhetoric about evil internal communist conspiracy with the atomic spy conspiracy, then on trial at Foley Square, New York City. Today, news stories about the Rosenbergs rarely describe the rabid anti-communist prejudice of the early 1950s and the perversions of American justice that routinely occurred between the court system during the Rosenberg years. Numerous press conferences were held by Hoover and Chief Rosenberg, Prosecutor Irving Sapol, to announce more arrests of red spies, even after the execution of the Rosenbergs. None occurred, and the Justice Department was never able to link atomic espionage to Communist Party officials. When Judge Kaufman sentenced the Rosenbergs to death, he unfairly blamed them for the Korean War. He used the word treason to describe their offense, further inflaming the public. The Rosenbergs could not have been charged or convicted of treason, the only crime defined by the U.S. Constitution, because the proof requires two witnesses of each overt act. Nevertheless, the Rosenberg partisans have concluded that while the Rosenbergs were convicted of conspiracy, they were actually executed for treason, adding to the vengeful nature and injustice done to the Rosenbergs. No one convicted of treason has ever been executed by the federal government in U.S. history, certainly not parents of two young children. Since the Rosenberg era, many people have been convicted as spying for Russians, some FBI and CIA agents. None has received a death sentence. Did anti-Semitism play a role in sealing the Rosenbergs' fate, as many as their contemporaries defenders publicly claimed? Though open expression of anti-Semitism in these times was more common, clear evidence of such part on Hoover, FBI agents, and the Justice Department was well hidden. Except for Fuchs, the entire cast of characters prosecuted as atomic spies under the FBI's theory were Jewish. Not surprisingly, the trial judge Irving Kaufman and the prosecutors Irving Sapol and Roy Cohn were also Jewish. The chutzpah lawyer Alan Dershowitz aptly writes, "Governments have traditionally used house Jews to go to other Jews in case of raising a specter of possible anti-Semitism." A January 22nd, 1953 CIA memorandum released to the Mariupol provides some clues to anti-Semitic prejudice amongst government officials. It outlines a plan to employ Jewish emissaries to pressure confessions from the Rosenbergs in exchange for genuine commutation of their death sentences. The Rosenbergs could be used as figures in an effective internal psychological warfare against communism, primarily of the Jewish issue. Further evidence of government anti-Semitism can be found in the handwritten jottings of Harry Gold, penned in his Philadelphia jail cell after Glass's arrest. But before the apprehension of Julius Rosenberg, Gold told the FBI and his lawyers that his espionage career, which began as industrial espionage, was motivated by his desire to help the Soviet Union become stronger economically, win the war against fascism, thus help save more European Jews from annihilation. After his first confession in May 1950, Gold was interrogated continuously by FBI agents. He spoke to them without the presence of a lawyer, but evidently he was communicating with his court-appointed attorneys as meticulously dated notes for J.D.M. Hamilton and Augustus Ballard indicates that June 23, 1950, Gold listed as item 21 Jewish problem under phrase he grouped the 3 Jewish Americans he figured who were subsequently indicted to spy-related charges. Listed the other people linked to the Justice Department to his spy rings who were not Jewish, including Klaus Fuchs, then wrote what are JDMH and H. Ballard's idea of how to handle this. Obviously, the ethnic makeup of the purported atomic spy conspiracies was under discussion by both the FBI interrogators and his non-Jewish attorneys. While advising Harry Golan how to handle what amounted to hundreds of hours of talks with interrogators, his lawyers were communicating directly with FBI officials, prosecuting attorneys, and Philadelphia federal judge James McGranery to abet the government's plan to fashion Gold into a credible witness against other Jewish members' perceived communist spy ring. The official Rosenberg story has been rewritten during the post-Cold War period in the popular media. The 1995 declassification and release of the Venona transcripts by the National Security Agency, newspapers tend to print articles that accept the authority, accuracy, and veracity of the decryption translations drawn literally from thin air of wartime intelligence cable traffic. The government was never revealed how it identified the real people from the code names used by Russian intelligence agents. Interestingly, a careful review of the released transcriptions by anyone familiar with the Rosenberg case record reveals that the contradict key elements of the government's original case. The only released transcription of the government says focused on Ethel Rosenberg's example indicates that she is not an espionage agent. Another transcript states that an agent of the government identifies Julius Rosenberg. Nothing about the atomic espionage. Regardless of the government and the press have trumpeted this material as proof positive of the Rosenberg's guilt. The reporters rarely raise questions about the notorious unreliable raw FBI, CIA, NSA intelligence files and their uselessness as evidence in court of law. Practically forgotten is our intelligence agency's 40-year Cold War record of lying to the American public, euphemistically called disinformation. The media has also given uncritically publicly non-documented oral reports of a number of Russian ex-KGB agents claiming knowledge of Soviet spying activities in the U.S. in the 1940s. For example, in 1997, Alexander Feklisov told the Western media he had personal knowledge of spying activities of Julius Rosenberg. Through not atomic espionage, however, the reliability of Feklisov's memory has been seriously challenged by scholars who once met him at a 1989 Moscow conference on the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. The propensity of disinformation of the U.S. intelligence agencies applies equally to their Russian counterparts. After the Cold War ended, former KGB agent, once stationed in the U.S., wrote that he routinely lied to his bosses, an admission that could throw into doubt the basic believability of any of the Venona transcripts. Some people here take as literal as truth. For nearly 5 decades, the search for truth about the Rosenbergs has become hopelessly contaminated by the murky world of intelligence psychological operations, PSYOP. On this 45th anniversary of their parents' execution this year, the Mariupols issued a press release analyzing a recent publicity on the Rosenberg case found in the newly published books, interviews with Russian intelligence agents, and the declassified NSA CIA files. They concluded that the FBI officials and agents, government prosecutors, and others knowingly and willfully, and with malice aforethought, manipulated the judicial process to execute 2 people for a crime they did not commit. The Mariupol statement is bolstered in the 1998 History Channel documentary The Boy Who Stole the Atom Bomb, based on the book Bombshell by Joseph Albright and Marcia Kunstel. The Washington Post reporter Michael Dobbs says on camera that American scientist Theodore Hall most likely committed the crime for which the Rosenbergs were executed. Albright and Kunstel report that Hall leaked the secret information on the construction of the atom bomb to the Russians months before the Rosenbergs were alleged to have convinced Ethel's brother and David Greenglass to spy on for the Soviet Union. Bombshell has spawned a new round of scholarly debates over Soviet spying activities in the U.S. during World War II era. Scholarly discussions of the Venona and Rosenberg case are also illuminating. Morton Sobel, co-defendant with the Rosenbergs, who served as 18 of the 30-year sentence, took part in an online discussion of the Venona releases, although Ellen Schrecker, in her new book, Many Are the Crimes, believes that Venona transcripts prove Julius Rosenberg was guilty in some kind of spying. She calls the Rosenberg execution judicial murder. Senator Patrick Moynihan also expresses squeamishness over the fate of Ethel Rosenberg. As the chair of the Senate Commission on Reducing Government Secrecy, his final report calls her treatment as harsh injustice. 5. The house I live in, the goodness everywhere, a land of wealth and beauty, with enough for all to share, a house that we call freedom, the home of liberty, and a promise for tomorrow. That's America to me. The Rosenbergs' 2 children were 10 and 6 years old when their parents were executed. As Robert and Michael Mariupol, they were raised in the household of the man whose song demonstrates that one could be both a communist and a patriot. Strange that the house I live in, which received so much airtime in the 1940s, was blacklisted in the 1950s and does not reemerge until the death of Frank Sinatra in 1998. That the American public is once again listening to the song in the song 1950s Thought Police labeled as red propaganda is a hopeful sign. Obviously, the historical judgments of communists as inherent undemocratic and un-American was wrong. As we emerge from the blinding fog of Cold War political hatreds, Abel Mariupol's promise for tomorrow guides us to probe the deeper truths about the tragic fate of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. We owe that much to their children. You can find the entire document on partyofcommunistusa.org. I'll link directly to it. All of the sources for the documents are there, and I think I want to conclude that this is a very important case to bring up, seeing how people are being indiscriminately rounded up into concentration camps, and there has been political violence in this country, and I think it's important to remind ourselves what type of government we're dealing with here and how we need to be careful and vigilant always. Solidarity, comrades, and have a good one.